Whether you use Google Sheets all the time, or maybe you're coming from Excel and you're not as familiar with Google Sheets, you may find that there are some number formats in Sheets that you're just not as familiar with. Even if you're just coming from Excel, you may find that some of the formatting names are slightly different, and so maybe you haven't tried them just because you don't know what they do. So we are going to spend some time today looking at the numbering formats in Google Sheets. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and I can't wait for us to get started. Before we look at our different examples here and decide on some number formats that we want to observe, let's figure out where we go to change number formats. And as we look above column C, we can see that there's a section of the toolbar that starts with the $sign, and as I hover my mouse over it, it says that that is format as currency. And then to the right of that, we have a % button. And then to the right of that, we have two buttons that work together, but also in opposite ways. So the first one is to decrease decimal places, and the second one is to increase decimal places. Now to the right of that, we have kind of an interesting little button here that's 1, 2, 3, and the name of that button is really just more formats. So when I click on that drop down, we get a list of a lot of different kinds of number formats that we might choose to use. And as we scroll down, we can see that numbers also includes dates and times. So something to consider when you create your spreadsheet. Now, if you decide for some reason that you don't want to use the toolbar and you would rather use the menu bar, well, that's fine. You can go up to Format in the menu bar, which is sort of in the middle, and then click Format, go down to the second choice where you have Number, and Number has exactly the same list as that 1, 2, 3 button. So it's really up to you which one you choose, and it might have to do with the day and how it's going, the other kinds of choices you've needed to make. Maybe your mouse is just closer to the menu bar than the toolbar, but whatever, you know that you can use either one to choose your number formats. Now let's look at our first example here in the upper left, and I've created about 5 stores, and this is their store numbers. And then we have 4 quarters, so an entire year of their sales information. And if we look at the second store, 4th quarter, you can even see that it has a minus sign. So they've actually lost money in this 4th quarter. Also notice that the numbers here are all just whole numbers. There's no decimal places and there's no additional formatting. So I've not typed in, say, a comma where that should go. And then what I did was simply take the information from the left side of spreadsheet here and copied it 3 times so that we could look at 4 different number formats that are all very similar, but so that we can contrast and decide which ones we think might work for different occasions. Well, let's start with this first one in the upper left, and I'm just going to select those numbers, and then I'm going to go to the 1, 2, 3 button, and we're going to go with number. Now, as you look at the word on the left, you can see an example of what that means on the right. So in this case, number is going to add a comma, and it's going to add 2 decimal places. Well, let's click. And then I need to widen out that column so that we can kind of see a little bit better. Let me widen out all the columns. Because it did in fact add 2 decimal places, and it's added commas where those are needed. And it just makes it a little bit more readable, maybe a little bit more professional. It all depends on what you're going to use this spreadsheet for. Now also notice that our negative number here has the minus sign in front of it. All right, well now let's go to the right-hand side of our different examples and look at accounting. So I've selected all those numbers. Let's go to 1, 2, 3, and come down to accounting. Now when we look at accounting, we can see that it adds a dollar sign and it's going to change our negative number so that it is displayed with parentheses. Let's click accounting, and again I need to widen out those columns just a tad. And sure enough, we have two decimal places, we have commas, and we have dollar signs. Now notice that those dollar signs are against the leftmost side of a cell. And let me even widen out H just a little bit more. So you can see that no matter where those numbers are, and of course they're aligning to the right part of the cell, that the dollar signs are always on the left. Now, this may look a little bit more structured, perhaps more professional, and it may depend on, say, your job and what's required there, or maybe even just your personal taste, but certainly accounting has a nice structured look to it. Well, let's come down to the lower left then and select those numbers, and then we'll go back to 1, 2, 3. And this time we're going to look at financial. Now financial looks very similar to accounting in that it has the parentheses around the negative number, it has the commas, the two decimal places. What it doesn't have though is the dollar sign. So let's click on that. And yes, it's very much as we predicted. And so here is something that you might want to consider. There are a lot of people or even businesses who really don't like the idea of all of the dollar signs that we see with accounting, and they would much prefer that you use financial without the dollar signs for, say, the detail part of a spreadsheet, and then only use accounting with the dollar signs for, say, the total rows and columns, but only at specific times, not for the whole spreadsheet. So if that's the case, financial may be a great tool for you to use. So now let's come over to our last example in the bottom right and select those cells. And then let's go back to the 1, 2, 3 button and click the drop down, and under accounting and financial we have currency. Now notice that it also has dollar signs, but it doesn't show the parentheses. So let's see what happens. Let's click on currency. And here we do get the dollar sign, but notice that the dollar signs are just to the left of the first digit of each number. So it's not quite as structured as accounting, but maybe this is in its informal view, just a little bit more like what you would like to have. Also notice that the negative number here is not a minus sign rather than parentheses. Well, we also had one more option, and let's go to the 1, 2, 3 and then come down to currency rounded. So that means that we're only going to see dollars and no cents for these particular values. So let's go to currency rounded. And the two decimal places have disappeared, but the dollar signs, the commas, and the minus sign have still remained. Earlier, I suggested that you might want to save your dollar signs just for the total rows and total columns, and keep the details that make up those totals just a little more simple in how they are formatted. So let's see how that works. First of all, we're going to go to this total row and select the cells there. And then we're going to go up to the toolbar just above, well, column B and C, kind of in between. And we're going to format as currency, so I'm going to click on this dollar sign and then widen out those columns to make room for the commas and the decimal point and the two decimal places. It makes a lot of difference. Now notice that this is currency, so the dollar signs are right up against that leftmost digit. Well, then let's also come over to our total column, select those cells, and add the same formatting. So again, we have the dollar sign, comma, decimal places, two decimal places as well. So really nice. These line up very nicely, but the details now are just too plain, and it just is hard to read when you don't have two decimal places for those numbers as well. So, well, we can click and drag over our details, and this time we could look at the decrease and increase decimal point. Well, in this case, we'd want to increase the decimal places, so let me click once, and it increases the decimal once. Click again, and it increases it twice. We have 2 zeros after each one of those numbers, and you know, that is not bad. The only thing is that these don't have commas then. One thing though, before we fix that and add in the commas, is that occasionally you will do some sort of math where you have a whole column of formulas, and the answers tend to have anywhere from 1 to, who knows, 7 decimal places depending. You can decide whether you want 2 or 3 decimal places, which is usually how people end up with their spreadsheets, by going back and forth between the decrease and increase decimals until they all line up and you have the number of decimals that you want. Well, now let's fix this by sadly going to a different format, but what we can do is go to our 1, 2, 3 button, and remember how we could use number to add in a comma plus the 2 decimal places? Well, let's click number, and now our decimal places line up. Our numbers just look so much more symmetrical in our spreadsheet, and all we have to do is just work at the formatting until we find the formatting that really fits. While we're here, let's look at kind of a unique type of number formatting, and that is plain text. So let's say that I type in some numbers, and after I type them in, they of course go to the right part of the cell because numbers align to the right. But I decide that this number is not going to ever be used in a formula of any kind. Maybe it's a part number, or it's an employee number, or it's a store number. But whatever it is, I just need to have it align to the left so I can save space in my spreadsheet. What I can do then is go to this 1, 2, 3 button and define it as plain text instead. And it moves it to the left margin. Now that's okay, and that would be fine, and you probably use it occasionally, but what you're probably going to use this plain text format for more than anything is when you have initial zeros. So for example, if I type 0, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and press enter, notice that the 0 disappears because spreadsheets really don't use initial zeros. But if that's a model number or a part number, you need to have that initial 0. So what you can do is come to the cell, go to your 1, 2, 3 number, and then select plain text and type that number again. And now it shows the initial 0, and it shows that it's text because it's on the left side of the cell. So while you won't use it all the time, sometimes this is exactly what you need to have. Our next 2 examples are related because they both show how you can work with the percent sign. Now the percent sign might be a little frustrating because it isn't just purely a formatting sign, it is actually a kind of math as well. So if you have decimal equivalents, you can turn them to percents with no problem, because Sheets is going to take those decimals and multiply them by 100. But occasionally, depending on the kind of math you use to come up with your answer that you want to format as a percent, well, that can be kind of an issue. So we're going to look at that in a little more detail. First of all, kind of a straightforward example though, where we have our 8 million plus for this first store, and we not want to know what percent the 8 million is of the grand total of 58 million plus some a little bit here. So to do that, we would go to G4 and then start our formula by typing equals. And then we will definitely choose F4, type that in, and then we want to divide by the grand total here in F10. Now, I happen to know, just kind of from experience, that F10 and F4 will change their references as I copy this formula down the column, but I want to keep that reference to F10 absolute. No matter how I copy this formula, I want to keep F10 as F10 and not F11 or F12. So what I can do is click in front of the F here of F10, go to my keyboard and press F4. Now what we get is formula $signs, not formatting $signs. And what those $signs in front of the F and the 10 mean is no matter how we copy this formula, we're going to always keep that absolute reference of F and 10. Well, now that we have that written, let's press enter, and we get a decimal equivalent, or actually just a decimal of what that percent should be. And then with Sheets, we even get a suggested autofill, and it says press Control Enter to fill the column with this formula. Well, yeah, that sounds great. I can also click the check mark though, and that even sounds better. One less thing to click. And so now we have these not percents, but the decimal equivalents. Well, all we need to do is click and drag over those cells, and then we go to just above column B and just to the right of the $sign, where now we're going to format as a percent, and when we click, we get 13.84, 6.60. Now, what's interesting is I could use those decrease decimal places buttons and do some clicks. So I could click, and as I click, it rounds those percents up to whole numbers. And so now I have whole numbers as percents, but I know that that 8 million is about 14% of the 58 million. Before we move on to our next example, let's remind ourselves that the numbers for each one of these quarters are in fact whole numbers. And then when we did our math and created a percent, we took a total and divided it by the grand total. So our math here was always division to find out the percent. But when we go to this next example, we have here 4 people who are reporting some sort of a daily score for a week, and we want to figure out their average. Well, part of creating an average is also division. So whole numbers division should be pretty much the same thing. Let's go up to our function button at the far right of the toolbar and click the drop down, and sure enough, average is our second choice here in the list. So we'll click average. Now the only thing about average is while it types out the word average and gets our formula started for us, it doesn't know what cells we want to average. So we're going to click and drag over B4 through F4. So now our formula reads that we want an average of the cells that start at B4, end at F4, and include every cell in between, is what the colon means. So that looks really good. Let's press enter, and it says, oh, 92, perfect. And then, of course, we want to click this check mark to autofill. Well, that's great. We have these averages now. Now notice that these averages are expressed as whole numbers and not decimals. That is going to create something interesting here in just a second. Well, let me select these cells because I want to add the percent sign. It's not just that the average is 92. I want to say that it's 92% or 82%. So I can go right up to this toolbar to the right of the $sign, find the format as percent, click on it, and whoa, that's not right. Well, if you'll remember in our first example, we had a decimal equivalent that we turned into a percent, and the percent sign to do that also multiplied by 100. So here, when we had whole numbers to begin with, and then adding the percent sign multiplied by 100, we now have, instead of 92%, 9,000%. Well, that can't stand. So what we need to do is think of a way to change our original answer so that it's a decimal instead of a whole number. Well, it's kind of easy, really. We just go up to the formula bar, click to the right of the formula, and divide by 100. And then I'm going to press enter here. Now I'm at 91.6%. That makes a lot more sense. So I'm going to find that little blue box at the lower right of the cell, find my skinny plus sign, click and drag down, and now all of these look much more like they should. Now I'd really like to just see 92%, so what I can do is come back up to the toolbar, go to our Decrease Decimal Places button, click once, click twice, and now we have the numbers that we kind of wanted to have from the beginning, the 92%, 87%, 82%, and 76%. Now let's look at some of the remaining number formats. And as I look at our 1, 2, 3 button, one of the first ones that I see here that we haven't looked at is scientific. So let me first of all type in a large number. Let's see, I have 1 through 9 and then a 0 even at the end, and I'll press enter here. And let's say that I want to convert this to scientific notation. Well, what I can do is, of course, go to my 1, 2, 3 button and then come down to scientific. And this even tells you sort of what's going to happen, but let's click scientific. And what happens is scientific notation puts a decimal point after the very first leftmost digit. And then it even shows you what the next two will be. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3. And then it puts in the E for scientific notation. And then the 9 tells us how many digits we have in our number past the 1. So if you count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, that is 9 digits past the 1. Occasionally, if you type a large number, maybe it's a social security number or something like that that has a lot of digits, once in a while those will be converted to scientific notation. So you do want to be careful and just be sure to remove that. Go to a number format or even a plain text format to get rid of scientific notation if it happens. Now we have several different ways that we can type dates, and I'm just going to type 1, 1. And just typing that, if I press enter, sometimes sheets will even add the year. So let's see if I can find another one here. Let's go with 4, 5, 21, and it'll let me keep that, for example. Well, then let's go to the 1, 2, 3 button, and let's come down to where it shows date. And you can see that with date, it's going to let you have one digit for the month, but it looks like it's going to require 4 places for the year. So let's click date. Yes, and we've converted those dates so that when they're in a column, they line up very nicely and they're very straight compared to what I just did. But they're also a very standard format that really helps you see how those dates appear within a column. Now there is also date and time, and we would probably want to maybe start with that by defining that field. So we'll go to the 1, 2, 3 button and then go to the date and time. So let's see, I could do my 4, 5, 21 space 5 o'clock. Let's see what happens. And I need to widen that column out because now it's showing me the full year, and it's showing me not only just the hour, but the minutes and the seconds for that time. There is also something that is called duration. So you would subtract, say, one date or time from another, and then it would show you the duration. So let's try that. We'll do equals 4-5 minus 1-1, and I'll press enter first. Oh, I get scientific. Cool. And we'll go to 1, 2, 3, and let's look at duration. And it shows us here in hours how many hours that difference was. Very interesting. All right, now we can also type some fractions. So let me come down to another cell. And again, I'm going to go to the 1, 2, 3 first. And I can find down at the very bottom here. Matter of fact, let me go up to format and number, because it's just going to be a little easier to read. It doesn't go off the bottom of my monitor here. So I could put in a number and then a fraction of some kind. So let me click that, and I'm just going to put 2 and 1/2. And it now notice that it lines up on the left because Sheets reads that not as a number, but really as text. But I can actually use a fraction for some of the things that I want to write. It used to be you could not write fractions no matter what the spreadsheet was. Well, let's go to format number yet again, because we're getting really right down at the bottom here, where as I hit the bottom of my monitor, you can maybe see that there are more number formats, or there are more date formats, or there are more time formats. Or at the very bottom, I can even create a custom number format, or basically those custom formats are things that we haven't already looked at, but things that you may want to use from time to time. So some really good choices. One thing that I did skip very quickly was that you could go with a different date format where the year is first. So let me go back up to that 4-5, come to the 1, 2, 3 button, and now let's reverse it so that I have year first, then month, then day, and that is very easy to accomplish as well. So a lot of different kinds of formats that you can choose and use and learn about. So be brave and enjoy all of the choices that you have with Google Sheets and number formats. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning, where you will find great online resources that include Universal Class, lynda.com, and Learning Express Library. Tune in each week as we introduce new videos on a variety of tech topics. You can find us at 1 o'clock on Wednesday and Friday, and 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Be sure to find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, or if you prefer, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at MCPLMO, where you can find our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist.